I can give you two experiences in terms of service learning that have affected students profoundly. And I'll start with the first service learning course I taught at Middlebury College, and then go back to the high school experience. And the first service learning course I taught at Middlebury might have been 10 years ago. And it was a first year seminar. Every Middlebury student has to have a first year seminar. And I decided, with the help of Tiffany Sargent, who heads all our service learning initiatives at Middlebury College, to do a service learning course. We were just getting onto the whole bandwagon with technology, so I wanted to look at how technology may change organizations, communities, people. So this course was on technology and social change. And every student in the class had to participate and work with a community partner. And these ranged from the community garden to the theater, local schools, the prison system. And what they were looking at is not only what was going on there to try to describe it, but then to also try to describe how technology was either helping or hindering, or what the future of technology may be in this particular aspect of the community. And the way I developed it was that all these community partners were in fact partners, so the presentations and the work had to be transparent and presented to these partners at the end of the semester. To make a long story short, what transpired is, in a class of 14 students, all 14 students ended up majoring in an area dealing with their community service project. And since I've kept in touch with 6 of these people, they've all gone on to do work in the area in which they did their community service. Right? The best story of that, I have several, but the best one was a young woman who worked, she's from the wrong side of the tracks, from Chicago. And she worked on young, kids that are put into the criminal justice system and recidivism. And she did a presentation for us, for the community of Middlebury, for the judicial system in Middlebury. And when she stood up and spoke after she was done, her name is Crystal. I said, Crystal, you're going to be a lawyer. She said, are you kidding me? I would never go near that system. She's now assistant district attorney in Chicago. Right? So that was that kind of an experience. Then what I have to say, as an advisor or as a teacher, the most independent students that I have, independent learners, most motivated learners, are those that have had a sustained service learning experience through their high school years. They're more independent. Their skills in terms of management, time management especially, their self-confidence about talking to different people, professors, people in the community, their understanding that what they're taking in school, math, chemistry, literature, is not just to fulfill requirements, but it's complementary to something larger. And that they have one foot in their own lives, that they have to accomplish certain things for themselves, but they also realize that those accomplishments should be focused on something within the community. And so those people have been highly, highly, highly successful. In between, the other challenge is we have to look for many students who have filled out a kind of a timesheet, because there's such requirements in our high schools in the United States, X amount of hours for service learning, so they see it as a curriculum building activity. Luckily, our admissions at Middlebury is very good at seeing through certain things like that. And so the genuine individual who has really done very meaningful work, some of it has been stuff that they've self-created and built. Some kids come to Middlebury having already built organizations. I have a young woman right now in Palestine doing a service learning project with a group of Palestinian youth on training kids how to be leaders, how to be spokespersons, how to organize politically. And this is work that she started when she was a young girl, literally, in Bulgaria, which she brought to Middlebury, and now as a second-year student, she's doing this work in Palestine. So that's the value of it. You know, it's almost like the higher education in terms of students is divided between two types of kids. Those that are there to gain access to a better way of living for themselves, material success, and those that are there to gain access to interesting, creative, imaginative work that can be really invigorating and exciting to work with people from different places and different challenges. I think that we often look at a lot of the challenges in education by looking at the worst schools, for instance, for lack of a better way of saying. So let's look at the worst school in the worst neighborhood and the worst people that are falling apart and see what the problems of education are. My argument would be that we need to look at the best schools and see what the problems are. Tony Wagner, a few years back, wrote a great book by doing just that, looking at the best schools. And he went to the children of CEOs of Oracle, Microsoft, and so forth. And what he found out through vast study is that the parents are not happy because the kids are not being taught valuable ways of thinking about the problems that they're in. They're being taught how to go to school. They're being taught how to excel in exam taking, how to look at the world through achievement. The name of the book is called The Achievement Gap. And what my experience has been in students that are extremely elite, the children of the 1%, it really boils down to the family and what kind of values and virtues families have given these particular students. I have students from extraordinarily wealthy families that these kids have been taught and given the opportunity to give, to learn through giving, to being a part of a larger community that is not as fortunate as they, to understand what it's like to be very privileged and what that responsibility is when you carry that privilege. And what happens to these students in a place like Middlebury is they will filter into and want to be a part of the conversations that are about social justice, democracy, sustainability, service learning, and will participate in these areas, and more often than not will go into fields unlike perhaps their parents, which might be education, which might be working for an NGO, or it might be medicine or banking, but their eye is not on a necessarily lucrative business in the traditions that they may come from, but in terms of, if I'm going to be a doctor, I want to look at what the effects of the environment on an individual or on a community. If I'm going to go into banking, I want to look at how to remake areas of banking so that it's the access to capital and opportunity extends further. So they're coming into these traditional fields that are very lucrative with very different questions, understanding their position, which is one of privilege, and understanding that that position of privilege gives them certain access where they might be able to speak what they know from their experiences. So that's my experience with very privileged students. There's the question of what do we mean by reciprocity when we're talking about elite institutions. The tendency, given the competition today in American schools, especially among the elite schools, is to do anything possible to make sure that the name, the emblem, what is our marketability gets enhanced. So reciprocity can very well be used as another hypothetical or another blurb on a kind of publicity tour that we're doing service learning, we're doing sustainability, and so therefore we must be good on the moral good, which enhances the brand. But one of the greatest challenges of our culture today is the question of reciprocity. In his famous book, The Happiness Hypothesis by Jonathan Haidt, who is a professor of psychology at University of Virginia, he says that one of the key components of happiness is reciprocity. So any sense of reciprocity that we do falsely for marketing is going to garner a negative for its people, for its community, and actually not push them out of a bubble, but keep them inside of a kind of a bubble. So what does reciprocity mean? For elite institutions, especially, for me, reciprocity means that we have to engage in the largest service learning project the United States has ever seen. And that is that every college and university has to literally adopt public schools. And that we have to share faculty, resources, curriculum, and students. It's sort of ridiculous that a student will go to an elite school, spend $250,000, and never spend a day in a public school doing service work. So my argument would be that with every curriculum, there should also be a kind of service contract that students have to do in public schools, and that it's essential for us that if I have a star professor of history, not only is that star professor of history sharing his curriculum with the local school, but we're also responding to things like pedagogy challenges, students tutoring, mentoring students up through the ladder. The reciprocity will come in that instance by students, faculty, institutions getting outside themselves. That really is getting outside the bubble. Bard College is sort of there. I look at Bard College as a place that's kind of on the fence on this, with their Bard early college institutions in New York and Newark and so forth, that they've developed a liberal arts education in grades 9 through 12, and literally the kid for 11th grade and 12th grade gets the first 2 years of college done. But I think we have to go further than that, right? Establishing schools is one thing, but that's too traditional, too brick and mortar. What we really need is a fluid curriculum and fluid communication with schools continuously working on our challenges. Building curriculums from there, which will give us the math, which will give us the chemistry, which will give us the physics, which will give us the writing. It will build teachers, right? It will build an understanding between a college faculty member and a high school, let's say, or a middle school, to understand what that kid is going through and what the faculty is going through, right? To teach certain things which you're already an expert in, right? So until that happens, in terms of sustainability in education as we have it today is not sustainable. Years ago, Jonathan Colesel said that when we talk about change in education, the people we never include are students. So we've learned this in Iraq. We're learning this now in Syria. We've learned this in Afghanistan, that unless you build from the ground up with the people having a say in things, we're not going anywhere. Education in Kansas City is definitely different than education in Washington Heights, New York. What we're doing is top-down, vertical, hierarchical. We're mimicking a harsh economic system, a harsh socioeconomic system. But what we need is to actually go into the communities and say, what do they need? And include children in the conversation. At every level, what do you want? I've been in so many schools in New York City where the teacher is tired, beaten up, and they blame the student. They just don't want to learn. Well, no, the student has changed. If you look at Washington Heights, which was a predominantly middle class to upper middle class Jewish community, Greenspan graduated from Washington Heights High School. Now it's all Dominican, practically, right? Do we understand what that change means? And do we understand who those kids are that have changed so drastically? And the answer to that question is no. We have to build a curriculum from the inside out based on what kids and parents and communities are saying. So just like that school in Washington Heights is one way, we go 150 blocks south to the Lower East Side of Manhattan, and the Bard Early College High School is very different from that, and the experience is very different, right? So it's different ways of building in different communities. If we can't do that, right? If we can't do that, it's always going to be a political nightmare that tries to compress student experiences through really harsh systems of assessment and measurement that also marginalize the teacher. A teacher needs emotional support, a teacher needs moral support, and a teacher needs the space to be safe enough for her to take creative chances with students in trying things that may not come out. And as creativity, we know, is not clear, it's kind of messy. But if that's taken away, creativity is taken away out of the classroom. If a student doesn't see a teacher trying, if a student doesn't see a teacher failing, right? Roland Barthes, in a famous essay on writers, teachers, intellectuals, said that the most perfect psychoanalytic act is that of teaching. Because when you're standing in front of a classroom, you're constantly being analyzed. Students see right through you. The students of the elite have been taught through systems how to view that teacher. In other words, you're learning not necessarily just the material, you're also learning what does it take to respond to that teacher in the ways that are going to get you ahead. The kid that is working in a marginalized environment, socioeconomically constrained, full of pressure, the kid that's going to school and has to turn in his cell phone to a booth in front of the school and pay $1 so he doesn't take a cell phone into the school, which is unheard of in middle and upper middle class schools. They always have to have their cell phones to talk to their parents, right? That kid is not being taught as he walks through a metal detector how to read the teacher, which is always part of schooling. So when we take those things out, we have nothing else left but a hammer, and to hammer away at the student. So what are we getting the student ready for then? More institutions. The difference between the elite and the non-elite is that in the elite world, we're getting kids ready for the institutions that are the centers of power, politics, finance, etc. In the non-elite schools, we're getting kids ready for the institutions that provide food, janitorial work, prison work. And it's all about a vertically structured society. So until we ask those questions about, do we want to live like this? Isn't it unhealthy? All the years of the way we've been doing things in education, K through 16, even into graduate school, have gotten us to this point. Climate change, governments that don't work, health problems. Do we want to continue? I got into this a million years ago.
Yeah.
Because going back to teaching and learning, when I came into this country, right, as a young kid.
Cuba.
Argentina.
Did you tell me that?
Yeah.
Argentina.
You just forgot.
I thought.
We talked about a lot of things.
Is It's happening more often.
Yeah, well, be careful.
That's what you keep.
If you remember.
We came to this country because my father had polio. And he was in the Air Force in Argentina. He was an aeronautical engineer. And so the Air Force sent him to New York. So we had to come. So he's in the New York hospital getting rehabilitation. We're living in the Bronx, right? So we used to go in to see him. And then we used to take field trips. And my parents' ideas of field trips were the Metropolitan Museum, the Guggenheim, like that. And they literally would stand, let's say in a period, the Greeks, the Renaissance, whatever, and stand me in front of things and say, what do you see? And then as I spoke what I saw, they would begin, mathematics began like this, writing began like this. So they gave me history. They gave me, in life-affirming acts, actually, I never was educated in school. I was always educated by my parents. And then I could draw. So then I would copy things, right? That led to this life of the mind, if you will, and then I was a real pain in the ass in grammar school, like bad. And my parents being Spanish, they sent me to Catholic school, right? Because that's what you do. And I spent all my time in detention. And I had one nun, very young nun, who I thought it was punishment, would hand me a piece of paper. And on top of the piece of paper would either be a word that she clipped out of a magazine or a picture, and she would say, write about that. And I thought, that SOB, everybody else is doing like easy crap. I'm doing this. I hate this. And then she would go over it with me and she would talk to me about my writing like it was something. So I'm like, it dawned on me after a while, I'm going, is this punishment because I'm actually having a good time here? Staying after school. And then she that's the first person, it was like around 6th grade, she said, you can write. You got something. So I was like, what? And my family is very literary, so then I started to go in that direction. And it was the same direction as the art, which is, I knew from getting my parents' education that every artist builds something on the backs of others. So where do you do that? Oh, English. Okay, I'll do English. So I just kept going and going and going and going and going. And when I got through my BA, it was like, I'm not good enough. I can't do anything. I'll just keep going. Okay, master's. Well, I better just keep going. The PhD is it, because then I'll really get into a writer's head and learn how to do this. So I was stupidly following this thing from childhood. And then it was, I'm living in Brooklyn. I got to pay rent. Rent, electricity. If I teach, I think I'm going to have time to do this other stuff. So I took jobs as adjuncts and this and that. And really, it was my first job that smacked me in the face and said, what you've been doing is an illusion, and the real world you just walked into is not what you think. Because I walked into a job at St. Peter's College in New Jersey. The guy who hired me was an NYU graduate. I was at NYU doing my doctorate. I had my 2 masters done already, on my way to the PhD. And I'm like, cool. NYU, he's going to take care of me. We're in. And I had my thesis, my master's thesis was on Paradise Lost, right? And the science of Paradise Lost. I am going to go into this classroom and teach them about poetry and literature, just like my teachers are doing to me at graduate school. As I'm walking to the classroom with him, he puts his arm around me. He hands me a roster of 30 plus names. And before I walk into the classroom, he says to me, now, Hector, this is very important. These kids have to pass a test at the end of the year. It's a writing test. It's only about 5 paragraphs. But if they don't get through this, they can't take their required courses in the upper levels. These are all remedial writers. So I'm like, what? I never even heard the term. I never even heard the term of teaching writing. It's just something that you do. I walk into the classroom. I hadn't even looked at the roster. And the first words out of my mouth in my consciousness, I didn't speak these, were literally, holy shit, they're all Latinos. I look at the roster, Castro, Jimenez, on down the line. I'm going, he hired me because of my name. He thought I could connect. He didn't give a damn about what I was doing in graduate school. So I was like, this is the world I just stepped into. So it was, what do I do? So really quickly on my feet, I figured if I can teach them the structure of one sentence, to write a subject, a verb, and an object, I can teach them how that sentence is equal to a paragraph. And from that paragraph, I'll teach them how to write an essay. And in between, I'll do my literature. I had a 90+% passing rate. Because I wasn't going to deny these kids literature. And my colleague would say to me, you're crazy. How can you be giving them the romantics? They can't understand anything. I said, no, it's the way you present the material. It's not that they can't, it's that you can't. So I chose, I'll teach you the tricks and how to cheat, literally, the system. And this is what your test is going to look like. And you're going to pass. But in between, you're going to write for me, and you're going to fall apart, and I'm going to give you literature, and you're going to learn something about yourself. And that was the 1985. I made that commitment right then and there. And that led me into the whole world of composition and writing. And then it was, with technology, it was the same thing. Late 80s, early 90s. You know, this computer stuff, I wrote my master's on an IBM Selecta 3. I'm writing my dissertation on a floppy disk. Big, it looked like an old Buick. So I'm like, this thing's going to affect us. My colleagues in the English department, you're never going to get tenure. You are insane. This thing's never going to, computing technology is never going to affect us. I said, you're absolutely wrong. This is going to affect every single discipline. So I started self-teaching myself how to code, how to work in Photoshop, how to edit film, how to do all that stuff. I was one of the first people in the country who had a gaming course where people played Sim City, built cities, and wrote. I created my syllabus, writing my own HTML and putting it online, interactive. Because I saw it coming. So for me, it's always been, a student, just the young woman from Vietnam that you mentioned before. She says, I Googled you and I see you're on Facebook and Twitter and this and that. And she goes, why do you do that? Because you're there. I don't care about Facebook or any of those things, but you're there. So if I'm going to teach you and you're 18 to 24 years old, I got to at least have an understanding of what your music is, what you're eating, what you're thinking, what you're using, what you're doing, so I get a sense of who the hell is sitting in front of me in the classroom. Otherwise, I'm teaching to space.